Chaos echoed through the courtroom as the gavel struck, slicing through the murmur of whispered opinions and judgmental glances. In the heart of a bustling city, where justice and personal motives often collided, Karoline Leavitt found herself seated at the defendant's table, her heart pounding like a drum. She had faced her share of challenges, but nothing compared to the weight of scrutiny looming over her that fateful day. The case had captured headlines, revealing a web of controversy that linked her name to a political scandal. Leavitt, a rising star in the local political scene, had been accused of ethical violations, charges she vehemently denied. Once seen as a beacon of hope and change, she now faced the possibility of losing everything she had worked tirelessly to build. As the courtroom filled with onlookers, journalists, curious citizens, and a few adversaries, each person carried their own preconceptions. Some whispered in hushed voices, speculating about her guilt, while others seemed to show her an awkward semblance of support. Yet, amidst the sea of judgments, all eyes were on her, the once prominent figure now seemingly reduced to an accused. Judge Harold Mitchell presided over the case with his characteristic no-nonsense demeanor and biting wit. Known throughout the legal community for his strict adherence to the law and an uncanny ability to cut through the facades of the courtroom with sarcasm, he was a formidable presence. He glanced over the room, his eyes settling on Karoline, who sat nervously at the defendant's table, her hands clasped tightly to keep them from trembling. "Ms. Leavitt," Judge Mitchell began, his voice echoing in the charged atmosphere, "you stand accused of ethical violations related to your recent campaign funding. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor," she replied, her voice steady despite the anxiety that threatened to overflow. The courtroom momentarily hushed, hanging on her words like a tightrope walker defying gravity. The prosecutor, a sharp-tongued woman named Evelyn Hargrove, stood up, adjusting her glasses with practiced precision. "Your Honor, we believe the evidence will clearly demonstrate Ms. Leavitt's involvement in manipulating campaign finances for personal gain. It's a straightforward case of power corrupting," she asserted, her tone dripping with conviction. Karoline felt a wave of desperation wash over her. The accusations were a fabrication of political rivalries, the result of a desperate attempt to tarnish her reputation and derail her career. She had dedicated her life to public service, championing the underprivileged and advocating for social reform. Now, instead of applause, she sat shrouded in condemnation, battling a tide of relentless negativity. "I request that we move forward with the evidence, Your Honor," Hargrove continued, her gaze biting, as she motioned to the screen set up for visual presentations. As the prosecution began to lay out their case, Karoline's thoughts drifted to her family, friends, and supporters who believed in her innocence. She visualized their faces, the trust they placed in her fueling her determination. Judge Mitchell nodded, his expression unreadable as he turned his attention to Hargrove. "Proceed, Ms. Hargrove, but be mindful of the brevity you promised in your opening statements. We're all aware that a trial should be about justice, not theatrical performance." With a smirk, Hargrove shifted her focus, unfurling a barrage of evidence that she believed would seal Karoline's fate. The images and documents projected onto the screen displayed transactions that linked Karoline to questionable funding sources. As each piece of evidence was introduced, Karoline struggled to maintain composure, a whirlwind of emotions churning within her, fear, outrage, and a flicker of hope that the truth would ultimately prevail. Defense attorney Marcus Fisher, a sharp and strategic thinker, rose with confidence when it was his turn to speak. "Your Honor, the evidence presented is circumstantial at best. The connections made by the prosecution are not only flawed but also politically motivated. Ms. Leavitt deserves to have her voice heard just as much as any of them." As the trial unfolded, each witness brought their own tales, weaving a narrative thick with intrigue, betrayal, and uncertainty. Karoline's anxiety twisted into determination. She had to fight, not just for her career but for her integrity and the values she stood for. The stakes had never been higher, and for better or worse, she would withstand the storm, ready to reclaim her narrative in a world that seemed bent on dismantling it. As the courtroom proceedings unfolded, an unexpected tension cloaked the air like a dark fog. The judge, an imposing figure with a reputation for his biting sarcasm, effortlessly dismissed the initial witnesses, their testimonies barely cutting through the atmosphere. But when it was time for Karoline Leavitt to take the stand, the entire mood shifted. "Miss Leavitt," Judge Mitchell began, his voice laced with irony that stung sharper than a gavel strike, "you claim to be a beacon of integrity in this political landscape, yet here you are, tangled in allegations that would make even a seasoned politician blush. How do you explain that?" A collective gasp surged through the courtroom, a ripple of surprise and judgment laced with curious anticipation. Karoline felt the heat rush to her face, her heart pounding as the judge's words sank in. Was this not her chance to defend herself, to clear the cloud of suspicion that had shadowed her reputation? Instead, she felt belittled, exposed under the critical gaze of the judge, who seemed more entertained by the drama than interested in the truth. Clenching her fists, she took a moment to gather her thoughts, battling the rising tide of indignation. "I understand how this situation looks, Your Honor," she replied, her voice transformatively steady despite the turmoil within. "But I assure you, I did nothing wrong." Judge Mitchell's eyebrow arched in disbelief, skepticism woven into the lines of his face. "Assurance is lovely, Miss Leavitt, but it doesn't absolve you of responsibility. Integrity in politics isn't just a personal virtue, it's a public expectation. It would baffle me how one could preach honesty while standing under such a cloud." With that, he dismissed her, the sharpness of his remark slicing through her resolve like a bullet. Stammering, Karoline felt the weight of doubt creeping in, seeping through her facade of confidence. How could he so cavalierly question her character in this moment of vulnerability? The words hit her hard, like poison coursing through her veins. Had she miscalculated her moral compass, or was she, in truth, a victim of circumstance? As she stepped down from the stand, the weight of the world pressed down on her shoulders. In the days leading to this trial, she'd vowed transparency, determined to prove her innocence as the allegations swirled like autumn leaves in a tempest. Karoline had emerged into politics with a firm belief that integrity meant standing up to the very system that often sought to compromise it. Yet here she was, faced with a judge who seemed to relish dismantling every piece of her reputation. In the back of her mind, the unrelenting question gnawed at her: was her vision of integrity naive in a world so riddled with corruption and deceit? She had fought for change, stood against the status quo, and rallied for truth, yet the very ideals she championed felt fragile in the face of accusations that threatened to erode her entire career. Karoline gathered herself, refusing to let the judge's mockery overshadow her resolve. Taking a deep breath, she recalled her reasons for stepping into this arena. She needed to articulate her defense not just against the allegations, but against the narrative that painted her as a hypocrite. Hadn't she faced dissent with conviction before? "Your Honor," she thought to herself as she mentally rehearsed her next steps, "this isn't just about these allegations, it's about the principles that define who I am." As she wiped away a hint of moisture accumulating at the corner of her eye, she felt renewed purpose surging through her. In that moment, she decided that her fight was not just for her reputation, but for the very integrity she believed in. The courtroom grew dim as she left, but within her heart, the flickering flame of determination reignited. Karoline would navigate this storm, not only to emerge innocent but to reestablish the ideals that first compelled her to rise. She had not come this far only to falter. She would forge ahead, armed with the truth and fortified by the belief that integrity could indeed shine through the darkest of clouds. After a long day filled with glaring accusations and cutting insights, Karoline left the courthouse feeling battered. Each step away from the imposing stone edifice felt heavier than the last, burdened by the weight of her failures. She could still hear Judge Mitchell's voice reverberating in her mind, his words sharp as glass: "You cannot escape the consequences of your actions." Those piercing remarks, meant to cut deep, sparked something unexpected within her, a fire of determination to reclaim her narrative and face her past with honesty. As she walked down the bustling street, her thoughts twisted and turned like the autumn leaves caught in the wind. Gone were the nights of tossing and turning, where dread and anxiety had coiled around her like a serpent. Instead, Karoline felt a newfound resolve compelling her to delve into her past actions. She realized that if she wanted to move forward, to rise from the ashes of her failures, she had to confront not only what had gone wrong but also her own role in that descent. What if I owned up to my mistakes instead of letting them own me? She pondered, the question lingering like smoke from a fading fire. It was a crucial choice she had avoided until that point, a choice that could be the key to her redemption. With russet leaves crunching beneath her feet, she made her way home, where the quiet of her apartment provided the solace she desperately needed. The days that followed were a whirlwind of reflection. Karoline surrounded herself with stacks of notebooks and her old speeches, each a breadcrumb trail leading back to the various points in her career where things had veered off course. She pored over her past campaigns, analyzing every choice and every misstep she had taken. What had initially been a pursuit for justice and change had spiraled into self-serving ambition, leaving her community feeling alienated and disenchanted. In the evenings, she began to journal, a cathartic act that allowed her thoughts to spill onto the page. She wrote about her early days, when her heart had raced at the thought of making a difference, her naive belief that every well-intentioned action would be met with support. Tears often blurred her vision as she recounted the missed opportunities to listen and the stubbornness that had kept her from engaging with those she wanted to help. That part of her life felt like a distant memory, but with each word she penned, it became clearer that those experiences were not just failures, they held lessons she was now ready to embrace. Seeking outside perspectives, Karoline reached out to mentors she had once relied on. They welcomed her calls with open arms, providing insights that only seasoned professionals could offer. They reminded her that every leader stumbles, but true grace lies in acknowledging one's flaws and learning from them. Their words bolstered her fragile spirit, reminding her of the unwavering support that still existed in her community, even when she had turned away from it. Each conversation reshaped her understanding, reframing her narrative from a tale of defeat to one of resilience and accountability. It was in embracing her vulnerability that she discovered the true value of humility. She learned that admitting mistakes did not signify weakness but instead could cultivate strength and authenticity. After weeks of introspection, late nights filled with self-discovery, and mornings of renewed vigor, Karoline stood in front of her mirror, rehearsing a speech she had crafted with painstaking care. This was more than just a public address, it was a calling, a heartfelt reconciliation with herself and those she had let down. It spoke not only to the courtroom's rigid walls but aimed to resonate with the broader community she had once sought to inspire. I stand before you today not as a flawless leader but as a woman willing to confront my missteps, she declared during her speech, her voice strong and unwavering. In my quest for change, I lost sight of the very people I aimed to serve. I let ambition cloud my judgment, and for that, I am deeply sorry. Karoline articulated her reflections with a raw honesty that both invited empathy and demanded accountability. With each word, she felt the shackles of her past begin to lift. As she concluded, a sense of liberation washed over her. Instead of seeking applause, she sought understanding, an open conversation about the complexities of leadership and community. It was a risky step, but it was the only path she could take toward rebuilding trust and fostering genuine connections. In that moment, Karoline realized that while the scars of her past would not disappear overnight, facing them head-on had forged a new path forward. Determined to be a beacon of change, she committed herself to the hard work of not just talking about accountability but living it each day. The flame of determination she had ignited would guide her through the uncertain terrain ahead, leaving behind the ashes of fear and stepping boldly into the light of possibility. The trial resumed weeks later, the tension in the courtroom palpable as the air felt thick with anticipation. This time, Karoline was ready. Gone was the frightened figure who had stumbled through earlier testimonies. Instead, she embraced the challenges that had come her way, transforming her approach to the proceedings. She had spent the intervening weeks reflecting on her past choices and the circumstances that led her to this moment, using that introspection to channel her vulnerability into newfound strength. As she walked up to the stand, a confident aura radiated from her. Her shoulders were squared, her posture upright, and her eyes held a spark of determination. Judge Mitchell looked at her with an unclear anticipation, perhaps expecting to be confronted with anger or defiance. Instead, he found a woman ready to own her journey, prepared to share not just her mistakes, but the hard-won wisdom she had gained along the way. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady and clear, echoing through the solemn room, "I accept that I made mistakes. I'm human, just as you are." Her words hung in the air, creating a bridge between her and the courtroom. She continued, But those mistakes do not define me. They are lessons that fuel my desire to improve and serve my community honestly. Karoline's narrative was not merely a defense, it was a passionate explanation of her path and her aspirations. She spoke with candor, articulating the choices that had led her to the bench. Confessing her flaws, she highlighted the stresses and pressures that had clouded her judgment. Yet, she inflected her testimony with hope, accentuating her eagerness to learn and grow from her missteps. As she delved deeper into her story, she conveyed her vision of contributing positively to society. I want to enhance community engagement and build initiatives that promote transparency and accountability in our local government, she stated fervently. I want to help others avoid the pitfalls I've encountered, to mentor those who may find themselves on a similar path. The atmosphere seemed to shift, a palpable change that rippled through the audience. Judge Mitchell listened intently, his usually stern expression softening as he considered her words. The courtroom, once filled with tension and scrutiny, transformed into a space of shared humanity. Her honesty resonated deeply. Karoline continued, painting a vivid picture of her commitment and determination. I've sought counseling and have taken part in programs that focus on ethics and integrity, she added, her tone earnest. I believe in the strength of community and the power of healing through active participation and responsibility. Her testimony became not just an explanation of her actions but a declaration of her future intentions. She represented change in action, turning a moment of vulnerability into an opportunity to inspire. Around the room, the audience hung on her every word, more engaged than they had been throughout the trial. They leaned forward in their seats, captivated by her strength and sincerity. Karoline spoke not just of the allegations against her but also of her ongoing journey towards redemption and reform. She embodied resilience, illustrating that one can rise from failures and craft a meaningful narrative of change. As she concluded, her eyes scanned the room, and she found herself connecting with individuals who perhaps shared their own struggles. I'm here today not just to defend my past but to advocate for my future and the future of our community, she implored. Together, we can cultivate an environment grounded in integrity, transparency, and betterment, one that encourages everyone to move forward instead of being weighed down by the past. The courtroom remained silent as her words settled in, feeling like a collective breath held in reverence. Judge Mitchell nodded slowly, acknowledging the gravity of her declaration. In that moment, Karoline had not only defended herself but had also transformed the atmosphere of the trial into one that embraced growth and redemption. As Karoline stepped down from the stand, she was met with whispers of admiration among some members of the audience. They had witnessed not only a woman facing the consequences of her actions but also an individual determined to make a significant impact despite her past. The trial had shifted from one of condemnation to a reflective journey of hope, a testament to Karoline's unwavering spirit and her commitment to forge a path toward a brighter future. The courtroom buzzed as the jury foreman rose, his demeanor grave yet hopeful. Karoline Leavitt sat at the defendant's table, heart-pounding. The air felt thick with anticipation. After a tense few weeks filled with accusations and swirling rumors, this was the moment that could change everything. Not guilty, the foreman declared. The word echoed through the room, and a wave of relief surged over Karoline, washing away the anxiety that had clung to her like a heavy cloak. She had spent too many sleepless nights visualizing this outcome, grappling with fear. Now, she could finally breathe. Amidst the stunned silence and whispers of disbelief from some spectators, her mind raced. The evidence against her had seemed compelling, yet the truth had prevailed. She glanced at her attorney, who offered her a triumphant smile. This victory wasn't just about the charges being dropped, it represented her freedom to reclaim her life, to step out from the shadow of suspicion. In that moment, Judge Mitchell's voice cut through her reflections. Miss Leavitt, he began, his authoritative tone softened by an unexpected sincerity. He adjusted his glasses, eyes fixed intently on her. I misjudged you, and for that, I apologize. The judge's admission startled Karoline. This man had presided over her case, his gavel striking down with weighty authority, yet now he stood before her, acknowledging his error. She felt a mix of gratitude and disbelief. In a system often unforgiving and rigid, this moment felt like the dawn of a new chapter, a chance to redefine herself beyond the constraints others had placed on her. "Thank you, Your Honor," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. She recognized this was more than just an apology. It signified a bridge between their worlds, a stepping stone toward mutual understanding. As she looked into the judge's eyes, she could see a flicker of respect, perhaps even admiration. As the courtroom slowly emptied, her family rushed to her side. Tears of joy brimmed in her mother's eyes, while her father wrapped an arm around her shoulders, a strong fortress against the storms they had faced. "We knew you were innocent, sweetheart," her mother exclaimed, overwhelmed with emotion. "You were so brave." Karoline's heart swelled with love as she embraced her parents, feeling the warmth of their unwavering support. They had stood by her throughout this harrowing ordeal, reminding her that the truth would ultimately shine through. With each hug, she felt the burdens of skepticism and judgment lift, replaced by a sense of validation. Winning the case was a relief, but the depth of her struggles had forged a resilience within her that she now recognized. She wasn't just a survivor of these incredible circumstances, she was stronger, more determined, and ready to reclaim her voice. News of the verdict spread quickly, with reporters vying to capture every detail. Cameras flashed as she walked out of the courthouse, but this time, she wasn't merely a figure in a story, she was a person, with her own narrative to tell. As she navigated the flurry of journalists, she felt a newfound confidence blossom within her. With a determined smile, she stepped forward, choosing to embrace the attention on her own terms. "I want to thank everyone who believed in me. The truth matters," she addressed the crowd, her words clear and resonant. Later, as she stood outside, watching the bustling streets filled with the city's life, Karoline felt a sense of liberation that hadn't graced her in months. She could finally move beyond the confines of the labels pressed upon her by others. Burdened no longer by the weight of guilt or shame, she envisioned a future where her past did not define her. Judge Mitchell's apology replayed in her mind, a reminder that even within the cryptic labyrinth of the justice system, there were opportunities for understanding and growth. Perhaps there were others like her, who had been misjudged, and in sharing her journey, she could inspire them to find their own truth. Karoline stepped forward into her new life, resolutely embracing her freedom, driven by a fierce desire to speak for those who had not yet found their voice. The courtroom had taken much from her, but it had also given her a purpose: to advocate for justice, to bridge the gaps of misunderstanding, and to encourage others to emerge from their shadows. Armed with her truth, she was ready to write her own story. Karoline smiled, realizing that the insult she once perceived as a life-altering blow had transformed into an opportunity. As she exited the courthouse, surrounded by supporters, a sense of purpose filled her heart. "This is only the beginning," she thought. Embracing her community and sharing her journey, she became an advocate for ethical leadership and integrity in politics. Karoline vowed to inspire others to rise from their mistakes, to own their stories, and to understand that redemption can arise from even the harshest insults. In the end, she wasn't just a name tarnished by scandal, she emerged as a beacon of resilience and hope, ready to reshape the political landscape, one honest step at a time.